Today, music is accepted as a unique expressive medium for emotions, thoughts, and self-identity. Many of the world's most popular artists use music as a blank canvas, meant to be painted with words and notes that convey ideas and feelings. Kendrick Lamar, Bruno Mars, SZA, giants in the music and pop culture world. Decades ago, this wouldn't have been the case. Society wanted music to stay consistent. They loved the rhythms and tonal patterns they were familiar with. So when Arnold Schoenberg, one of the most controversial contemporary composers of all time, carried out his right to compose music of his choosing and the responsibility as a composer and creator to push the boundaries of music, he received plenty of backlash. Schoenberg's fight to preserve creative rights and his artistic responsibility to push boundaries of art ensured creative rights for future artists. This is the story of Schoenberg's Symphony of Rebellion, the story of the composer who redefined music. Arnold Schoenberg was born September 13, 1874, in Vienna, Austria, into a non-musical family, but was later exposed to music through his brother and cousin, both gifted singers. He began composing small works at 9 years old. Throughout his upbringing and early life, he was mentored by a pool of composers and musicians, including Oscar Adler and Alexander von Zemlinsky, which led him to produce his first public piece, String Quartet in D Major, in 1897. While he dabbled in painting, his artwork never took off, but left a lasting impression on his views of art. As a composer in the late Romantic era, his early works were received well. However, later in his career, Schoenberg's genius matured, as did his musical style. In the early 1900s, as the second phase of Schoenberg's career began, people believed music had to be tonal and pleasing. This means his later works experienced considerable pushback. Additionally, he was Jewish, living in an era of rising anti-Semitism, especially in Austria and Nazi Germany. When the Nazis took power, he was forced out of his home, into California. This added layers of difficulty to his artistic journey. His music was considered degenerate by the Nazis, a label that would prove to be destructive to his career. These issues weren't in vain, at least, because they helped mold Schoenberg's opinions on matters such as innovation and self-expression. His move to the US allowed Schoenberg to keep working, but his music still wasn't appreciated. Schoenberg created a method. The 12-tone technique, also known as serialism or atonality, was a method of musical arrangement in which all 12 tones of a song are equal. He did this by never playing a note twice before every other note had been played. This looked interesting on paper, and listening to it was also pretty rough. It seemed unintelligible and random. When this was first introduced, people hated Schoenberg on a personal level for making what they'd considered to be utterly disgraceful trash. Listening to one of these songs is akin to reading a paragraph with 12 focus topics, each of which are equally as important. Most of his famous pieces, such as Für Gellerte Nacht, employed this method. Without it, music wouldn't have broken the barriers it did, and never have reached the heights it reached. Fortunately, Schoenberg didn't let negative critics interfere with his right to create. He believed it was his responsibility as an artist to continue. In a 1935 article titled Composing with 12 Tones, Schoenberg stated, "To understand the very nature of creation, one must acknowledge that there was no light before the Lord said, 'Let there be light.' And since there was not yet light, the Lord's omniscience embraced a vision of it, which only his omnipotence could call forth. A creator has the power to bring his vision to life, the power to realize it." Schoenberg made his right to self-expression known. He believed his art was divinely inspired, and therefore a responsibility, not a choice. In addition to faith, Schoenberg had other ideas about responsibility. He made music to innovate the world of art because he knew it was necessary. He wanted to retire the constraints that were put on music by tonality, the norm at the time. In a quote, Schoenberg stated music had to be new and challenging. And in another, he said, "If it is art, it is not for all. And if it is for all, it is not art." Today, this idea that music is for a select few might seem elitist, because it was only for scholars who understood it on a deep level. But at the time, it was progressive. It helped people understand music deeper, and in the future, it opened doors for the accessibility of music for others. It allowed people to make what they wanted, regardless of others' opinions. One of Schoenberg's proteges, Alban Berg, stated that he believed even when music breaks the guidelines for tonality, but contains other musical elements like familiar chords, then it is still music. Through his writing, it's clear Schoenberg felt the same. They felt people thought their pieces weren't music because they held tonality as a golden standard, and the lack of it and the unfamiliarity that followed deterred listeners. Schoenberg understood he was responsible for the beginning of an era, where this golden standard no longer stood. Atonality was a gateway of expression for Schoenberg, and could be for others. Schoenberg knew this, and knew he was responsible to the world to unlock the right to expression. Schoenberg believed when someone isn't afforded the artistic right to create, they have a responsibility to fight for their right. Inversely, he believed when someone has an artistic right, they are responsible to use it if capable. He encouraged others to do this because he wasn't always given the same luxury. While living in Austria and later Nazi Germany, he was unable to express himself through art because his rights were stripped away. Innovation was challenging for Arnold, and the expressionist movement in another form of art, painting, was very similar. In their heyday, expressionist painters extended people's concepts of art around the world. Their works were new, meaningful, and tended to have dark, controversial underlying ideas, like the inevitability of death and the acceptance of taboo topics. This outlet for creativity quickly faded away, as the degenerate art label really stuck due to the grotesque nature of their pieces. People thought these artists had to stop and that the right to creativity didn't apply to them. This almost happened to atonality, because people had the same outlook on these paintings that they did on atonal music. Schoenberg managed to preserve his creative right by persevering through the critique. Schoenberg innovated using more than his music. He wrote books, poems, and painted artworks that contributed to his cause. Each of his expressionist creations reached a different audience. Schoenberg was more than a composer. He was a teacher, mentor, and inspiration to many. As a teacher, he taught at different schools, sharing his gift with anybody who wanted to listen. As a mentor and inspiration, he made the most substantial difference, helping develop some of the most influential composers of that era, including Alban Berg and Anton Webern. He inspired people like John Cage, Bernard Herrmann, and Wassily Kandinsky to continue pushing the boundaries of art in different ways. John Cage made his infamous piece, 4:33, which was 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence, hence the name. He let the audience be the music, as he believed that true silence doesn't exist, an idea inspired by Arnold. Kandinsky wasn't a composer at all, but a painter inspired by Schoenberg. Bernard Herrmann is the most influential movie composer of all time, responsible for many famous movie soundtracks, including that of Psycho, which frequently gets referenced in pop culture. He also took inspiration from Schoenberg. The plethora of famous people who learned from Schoenberg cements him as one of the most inspirational composers of all time. In his years of composition, he made a lot of music. One of his famous song cycles, Das Buch der Hangenten Garden, contained his infamous piece, Du lennest wieder ein Silberlied. The song doesn't have reference to a key, meaning it was the first song to use serialism. This was groundbreaking for him, as the song cycle was very popular, meaning that many people were exposed to 12-tone music. This led to developments in music theory and comprehension, altering the course of history. Though his music was never really accepted during his lifetime or even now, Schoenberg's ideas were still incredibly significant. His early developments in atonality laid the groundwork for music as an academic course of study, in addition to solidifying an artist's responsibility to push boundaries. In other words, he ran a path uncharted and took the world with him. In 1998, the Arnold Schoenberg Center was founded in his name. People from all over the world go there to learn and celebrate the amazing contributions Schoenberg made to art and expressionism. Arnold Schoenberg was one of the most impactful composers of his era. His decision to persevere through negative critiques not only changed the way music was made and received, but also ensured the creative rights of artists around the world. When he died in 1951, it was a travesty. While original Schoenberg works were no longer created, his music lives on as an influence through other composers and expressionists.